I'm down at the farm field just down the road from where Sasha and I live, where we farm now about 1.5 acres of beautiful open field context. Taking a look at some garden beds this evening, doing a little bit of light weeding here or there, just kind of checking in on some of the nursery plants and some of the annual crops we have growing on here. And I thought I would take a little wander through, talk about what we've done after our garlic harvest this season. So mid-July, what sort of crops were set in motion. We just started working in a serious way in doing our potato harvest and talking about follow-up crops that'll happen there, what the succession plan is, and some other things that are working pretty nicely. And here's some little issues here or there, and some really beautiful things that are doing really lovely work right in the landscape. I'll start right here. These two beds run north to south, which are in opposition to most of the beds. Almost everything here runs east to west, basically using the pattern that our friend Darren, who set this field in motion many years ago, used. But since we don't need a tractor to come through here, we have this bed, these two beds facing north-south, or running north-south. They face the road. So when folks are coming by in the evenings, taking walks or whatever, these are the beds that present out to the world. And so we try to make them as nice as possible. This time of year, later August, it's coming together in a beautiful way. I think next year we're going to add some additional perennial layers, but we've got some golden giant amaranth that we started from seed and transplanted in. Believe it or not, all of the red amaranth in here are entirely volunteers from last year's crops, and they're really good at showing up in this landscape and being persistent, and we really welcome that. So wherever it was compatible, we just left those. Where it wasn't, we pulled them and put them right back on the ground. We've got a few sunflowers going, much less than last year since we didn't really use the sunflower seed as much as I thought we would. We decided just to plant a little bit to get fresh seed for next year, but these are all planted from one head in particular that had a phenomenally large, beautiful head on a really clean, straight stalk, and it feels like these are showing up in a similar way. That one's about 8 feet tall. I think we'll come back to doing sunflower in a little bit of a bigger scale next year, but for now this is a nice little showing of them. Sunflower with the amaranth is quite a nice combo. The edge here is tromboncino squash, which is technically a winter squash. That's all these little characters in here, but makes a phenomenally lovely summer squash if you harvest them on the early side. For some reason, this is a picture across the whole landscape here, our squash are just not really being as explosively happy this year as I thought, or that I would have hoped. They're here, we're getting a little bit, but there's some that are kind of anemic and yellow and taper off and die. You know, here's one that was sitting still for a little while and then finally got going. I think there's just a little bit too much root competition, but we'll see. I think there's still another solid month to grow and make a crop, so a little bit weak as an edge plant, but I'm happy to have them here, and we've been nibbling. We haven't been gorging, but we've been nibbling. How's that for an incredibly strange thing? I just noticed this. I wonder if that's like, is it a genetic strangeness or some sort of mechanical thing happened early on? We'll keep an eye on this one. This might be an interesting sunflower to save seed from. I don't know that this is something I'd want to select for in the long run, but good on you for your unique expression, my friend. We're trialing, with Darren's permission, incorporating more super hardy perennial elements in his field. And so on the northern edge of this middle field, so there's lots and lots of beds within here. If time allows, I can go through and talk about some of these northern pecan and English walnut beds that have squash on the sides. There's potatoes, there's elderberry cuttings, there's third-year river locust, a mix of food crops and nursery crops. This is an intent to establish pollinator areas and real soil building and high potential monetary value, but also food resilience in the form of sochan and Jerusalem artichoke. These are both extremely hardy native perennial edible plants. The Jerusalem artichoke most folks are aware of as a root crop. These were all planted with leftover roots from last fall's shipping season, and they are completely owning the boundary here. So I mow tightly with an electric riding mower with bags on the back. I manage this field with that, and I use that extensively as our soil building pattern, really high quality green manure. And so that tight mowing with the sunchokes will keep the grass from creeping back in, and we'll maintain that no sunchokes can leave from this bed heading south. Anything that shows up in here will get pulled and laid as a mulch, and the sochan is just about as equally strong as the sunchoke. So they're going to be not dueling it out, but they'll be finding a balance between each other. We'll just take a push mower once in a while through the middle. Sochan puts on a really incredible green. We're actually going to be offering them in our fall sales for the first time in small numbers, and in the spring we'll offer quite a bit more. Beautiful amount of flower, so really great nectar source for the bees this time of year. Overlaps with goldenrod, and then once they start tapering off, the sunchokes will be picking up. So we get a rhizome barrier, we get a beautiful boundary plant that is compatible with kind of keeping grasses out and the like. They're pretty rugged and robust. We don't expect to do other things within here. It'll be sochan and sunchokes for quite the while, but goes down about 100 feet on the sunchoke side. The sochan we might go a little further or do some other diversity, but loving to see some more really hardy herbaceous perennial elements in here. I'd like to continue on with that. Lot less work for us to maintain a sochan and sunchoke bed than it is to try to keep up with lettuce and parsley. To give a sense of scale, so these are beds that were set in motion from bare soil in November of last year, so 10 months ago, and we have not watered these once. Put down a whole bunch of wood chips in the walkway and used the wood chips to pin down weeds. Rather than pulling weeds, I just pinned the weeds down. Worked phenomenally well with the sunchokes. And so this is the first year they're getting that big, and this is a variety called Diversity. The blue eyes get about 12 feet tall, and the sochan you can see is about 6 feet or so tall. I think next year they'll probably get a little bit taller, but really amazing how much power the perennials can offer. It's part of the reason why we like offering these plants. Potatoes are really winding down. We've been slowly chipping away at digging them out. This is Kennebec, which is one of our favorite winter eating potatoes. We've got maybe 10 varieties that we grew this year. Probably about 2/3 of them have been dug up. They're down in the root cellar now. It's a little early, it's a little tricky whether the root cellar will be cool enough for them. I think it'll be okay. But right now we're getting to this place where the weeds are starting to get strong again because the potatoes are losing their canopy. We kind of want to dig them and get stuff out before the seeds maturate and be thoughtful about harvesting this, sending it to the chickens. But these potato beds will be transitioned back into garlic, which is something we've done for a number of years. I've talked about that. I'll link to that here. So this is all Kennebec. It's about 60 feet. And it's a monolithic wide bed, about 6 feet wide, so it'll be a very, very wide garlic bed. And there's enough space in the middle for me to transplant in some flint corn. It didn't really work out. I think there was not nearly enough water for this corn to work the way I'd hoped. But they're here, they're growing. But there'll be a few hundred pounds of Kennebecs in this bed, and we're going to leave them here until we're ready to plant garlic. So ideally we dig the potatoes out, we work the soil with a broad fork, and then we plant garlic. And we'll fill the interior of these beds with nut tree seeds, as we've done for year after year, and has worked beautifully for us. The next bed to the west here, same idea. It's 6 or 7 feet wide. This is something, again, it's a new offering this fall. We'll do a lot this fall and some next spring. These potatoes, we've been calling them ancient blue. It is a perennial Peruvian purple potato. So many peas, it's crazy. And you can see the anthocyanin load in these is so immense that the stalks are purple on them. The potatoes themselves, they're smaller than most of the normal conventional, standard potatoes you're used to, but they're extremely flavorful. They keep for like almost a solid year. It's ridiculous. And there was a planting row on one side and the other, and they infilled the bed with such potency that they're incredible at weed exclusion. Whatever we miss in here will perennialize and come back next year, for better or worse. It's kind of tricky. And we'll be digging them this fall and offering them up. That'll be another new offering on September 1st that we're excited to dip a toe into a perennial potato offering. I'm realizing I had less time to do this video than I'd like, so I'm going to focus in on this area because this was the main thing I wanted to talk about, and then wrap it up. We'll do, if there's interest, I can do a more deep dive on some other areas. There's lots happening in this field this year. This was where we had our garlic this year, and all of that was harvested in the 2nd and 3rd week of July. And so we're at, oh my gosh, we're at the end of August, so this is only 1 month later. A lot happening. The southernmost bed, not that much happening. This needs to be renovated. There's a whole bunch of turnips from the spring. This wasn't in garlic, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a couple beds in here. All of them are examples, or I should say trials, varying levels of success of ways to follow up garlic with crops to bring us to the fall. And then this fall we can either put in cuttings or nursery plants or other sorts of interesting things where we can cover crop it for the winter. come back to it in the spring. But the southernmost bed, we put in some nice transplants of parsley, of kohlrabi. So these are the kohlrabi here with lots of generous spacing. It's a little weedy in some areas and it's cleaner in others. But the idea is that they were already nicely established starts, and we've got another at least probably 50-60 days before a frost, most likely. And I think even after a frost, they should grow well for us. I imagine we'll revisit this, but that the kohlrabi will do extremely well as a fall storage crop. What I've been doing is I hand weed a little bit here or there, but I don't spend a lot of time on that. What I mainly do is anytime I'm out here with the riding mower, it's cheesy to be, in a way, to say I'm doing this permaculture project and I do a lot of mowing, but the landowner likes things mowed. It actually makes it easy for our little electric car to pass through. And every time I mow with that solar charged electric mower, which is nice and quiet and a pleasure to ride on, all of these grass clippings, I just pin down the weeds nice and thick, and they keep moisture in the soil. They suppress the weeds, and then the next time we get rain, it leaches nutrients. These are very, very hungry plants. And so we're adding nutrients into the soil. We're suppressing weeds a little bit here or there. I'm not going crazy with it, but just enough to let these grow in a good way. And in the fall, we'll be able to harvest them all, leave the root systems in the ground, and then hopefully cap the beds with a ton of shredded leaves or wood chips or composted manure, whatever is appropriate at the time. I'll periodically use my electric weed whacker to snip down all the herbaceous stuff in between them, but I don't want to do soil disturbance because it's a little dry now. But I'll chop that, feed it under the plants, and then put some grass clippings on top. And these plants are starting to really take off for having been in here for about a month. A lot of flea beetle damage at first. They're just getting their feet established. We're feeding that to the hens. But we've got about 200 cabbage, broccoli, kohlrabi, and Chinese cabbage transplants in here. Definitely seeing that where I've had the bandwidth to apply way more grass clipping mulch, the plants look happier and healthier. But for being the end of August, the size they are seems to be right on track for us to have some really beautiful storage, some storage greens and nice heads of cabbage and broccoli to put in the root cellar for the winter following garlic. Trialing a grain amaranth as a follow-up crop to the garlic. So this is our golden giant amaranth that was seeded pretty liberally through here. I'll go through and thin them down relatively soon, but it's a nice way to keep the weeds down is let them come up thick, and then we'll cut them and either feed those to the hens or feed the soil. This has got Japanese millet and amaranth through here. Again, weed whacking the walkways, and they're starting to take off. They're about knee-high right now. It's a question mark whether or not they will mature actual seeds. I'm not too worried about that. Just having really, really thorough ground cover and deep fibrous root systems that can then be cut and laid down to feed the soil is good enough. If we get grain from it, I'll be thrilled. And then to the north of that, we've got sorghum Sudan grass, which last year I trialed one bed. I wish I had done more again this year. This is about waist high in 30 days, maybe 40 days right now. And this is an amazing C4 pathway green manure, super frost sensitive. So the first frost, this will melt and we'll pin it all down, cover it in leaves or hay or clippings in the fall, and then broad fork in the spring and plant it out. But all of this has happened since our garlic harvest, and it's feeling really functional. I'm very hopeful for some Chinese cabbage. They had a rough start with these flea beetles, but we'll just pluck those leaves in a little bit and feed those to the hens, tidy things up, and they should be doing just fine. The hazelnuts in here, those were co-planted with our garlic. So there are 2 rows of garlic, hazelnut, 2 rows of garlic. They'll stay here until the fall. We might have to chop and drop some of the cover crops to make sure they don't get lost to the weediness of what we've set in motion. But they're in there. Maybe they'll grow for a second season, but it seems to be working pretty nicely. Lots of transplants, seeding of grain crops as cover crops, and then some of these beds we worked up with a rotary plow to build the beds, and in the furrows I planted beets so they can collect all the excess nutrient and compost that we put in can settle around them. So we've got beets in the windrows on the boundaries of the bed, turnips on the top, and then again beets, and then in the interior of this bed we direct sowed zucchini. That did not do as well as I'd like. They didn't take off as well as I'd like. Some of them died off earlier on, You can see some gaps in here, but we've been starting to harvest zucchini already, 35 days, 40 days since sowing, and I think these are on track to do a lot of production until frost. Just getting started, really happy. And to start zucchini, to start cucumbers in midsummer, later summer, you avoid a lot of the cucumber beetle pressure that happens in the spring. So we can skip zucchini when everybody else is doing it, when the pressure is high, and then have them follow our garlic crop as a way to get us a ton of extra nice vegetables coming into the fall, then let them melt with the first frost and replenish the soil. I'll try to go into some other areas in more detail when time allows. Let me know if you got some questions here, but yeah, with the limited time I had this evening, I thought it'd be nice to show a really sweet amount of productive, healthy, soil affirming diversity that can follow a garlic crop. So we're in a cool climate. Mid-July is when all of this was started or transplanted in. It's a good reminder that the growing season really isn't over until it's truly over. I'm learning, especially with high tunnels and stuff, like, you know, it's really just January and February that stuff will sit still. But out in the field, you've got all the way until mid-October in a cooler climate, or even later, November. We're getting more mild all the time. But this is what diversity looks like as a way to follow up a garlic crop. We'll follow this with more diversity, probably more perennial nursery elements, and some more annuals for next year. We'll share as that unfolds. I didn't even get a chance to talk about the southernmost field. This had all of our potatoes. This year there's so much happening, peppers and onions and tomatoes and all sorts of other fun aspects, but that'll be for another time. Stay tuned for more fun in our field experiments. A mix of kind of standard annual crop farming, straight rows, all that kind of cleanliness, tidiness whenever we can, and then integrating ideas of guilds and relationships and diversity within the plantings. All that seems to come together to work pretty functionally, but that'll be for another day.